It is common knowledge that the Soulspawn games take a lot of inspiration from a manga series called Berserk. If you're familiar with both Berserk and the lore of Elden Ring, then I'm sure that you have noticed some similarities between Miquella and Griffith. But what you might have missed is the sheer number of similar character traits as well as identical events both characters have respectively experienced in their own stories. With the upcoming Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, we'll learn more about the enigmatic figure of Miquella. But prior to the DLC, we can actually learn more about him by looking into Griffith as his potential inspiration. Oh, and a spoiler up front, they're almost one-to-one the same character! So, without further ado, let's go over the similarities. The first noticeable similarity between Miquella and Griffith is the androgynous design. Throughout the entirety of Berserk, Griffith's looks can neither be described as truly male or female. Rather, there's always a perfect balance between the characteristics of both sexes, enticing both men and women alike. Miquella also has this androgynous design next to his condition of eternal childhood. Although his appearance of long braided hair combined with a dress or tunic might suggest the depicted person to be female, Miquella is being acknowledged as a boy by every item description about him. Plus, as we can see in the teaser for Shadow of the Erdtree, Miquella is facing away from our view, adding to the ambiguity of his gender. If this image would have been released before the launch of Elden Ring, I'm sure many would have assumed this figure to be a woman. Which Miquella also kind of is, when we consider his other persona as Saint Trina, but more about her later. Concrete, in-game evidence towards his feminine appearance are the statues we see throughout his Haligtree kingdom depicting Miquella and his sister Malenia. Speaking of the Haligtree, let's go over other similarities regarding each of Griffith's and Miquella's own kingdoms. Griffith's desire to have his own kingdom is a very strong drive for the story development in Berserk. It is a dream he had since he was a child, and throughout his life, Griffith would go to any lengths in order to make his dream become reality. An ambitious and very dangerous drive to those around him with horrifying consequences we'll cover later. And in the end, Griffith obtains his kingdom and rules over it as a merciful, noble, wise, and alluring king. However, that is what his subjects see while being oblivious to his ruthless, manipulative, and selfish actions. While not outright identical, we can find Miquella in a very similar position in Elden Ring. He has founded his Haligtree kingdom and essentially created an utopia for the shunned inhabitants of the lands between, which coincidentally, Falconia, Griffith's capital city, also serves this purpose since the lands of Midland and beyond are flooded with magical beasts against humans have no chance in a fight. As such, human survival became extremely difficult outside of Falconia. Plus, from everything we learn about Miquella and his personality, Malenia sums her brother up in an interesting way. We learn this through the item description of Malenia's winged helm with the following quote directly from her. "My brother will keep his promise. He possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god. He is the most fearsome Empyrean of all." The way Malenia talks about Miquella here is almost identical to how Griffith is perceived by others, especially his subjects and soldiers. I hope you're still with me so far, since we have only scratched the surface of this iceberg. Another identical event occurring in both series is that both Miquella and Griffith each created a giant tree. In Miquella's case, we learned that he planted a sapling Haligtree that he watered with his own blood in order to replace the Erdtree with his Haligtree. And presumably additional goal is to use the Haligtree to also heal his eternal childhood affliction, but we'll discuss this later in some other points. In Griffith's case, he didn't plant a tree in a traditional sense. Instead, he manipulated events in order to use the body of a giant apostle known as Ganishka and the power of Skull Knight. By splitting Ganishka with a slash of the sword of Beheritz, Griffith, or rather Femto, transformed Ganishka's evolved body into an enormous tree. This tree affected the world of Berserk significantly by merging the physical and astral planes of existence, the realm of the living with the realm of ghosts and magical beings in simpler terms, and permanently transformed the entire world. It allowed, next to the inhabitants of these two realms to interact with one another, also for fast travel across the world by using the tree's branches. For the branches of this dubbed world tree are omnipresent and spread quite literally all across the world. As such, it allows for certain groups to traverse the world over these branches called sky paths, since they enable travel through the sky. The last interesting point about the world tree is that Griffith's city of Falconia is situated at the foot of this tree, in a very similar fashion as to how Alphael sits at the basis of the Halic tree. This detail, as well as both trees, is a fascinating similarity I noticed in the midst of writing the script. However, the following next points are even more on the nose that Griffith definitely served as inspiration for Miquella's character. Because the next event both characters eventually have suffered from is the unfortunate fate of being abducted by an evil power. We learn in great detail about Griffith's abuse and downfall throughout the Golden Age arc. Prior to this key event at the end of this arc, other situations unfolded which strikes the same tone as what Morg did with Miquella. As a young commander of the Band of the Hawk, one way in which Griffith obtained funds for his troops and to get closer to his dream was by offering his body to a noble man. A man he would later encounter on the battlefield whilst in a disadvantageous position at the beginning of the battle. Griffith turned the tide of this battle with his tactics, which resulted in him being victorious. And a byproduct of his victory was that Griffith could kill the men who abused him as a teen. The next stage of Griffith's abuse would come later in his life when he was imprisoned by the King of Midland for advancing on the kingdom's princess. The king would subject Griffith to excruciating torture for 2 years straight, resulting in his once strong and attractive body becoming weak and deformed to the point where he couldn't be recognized anymore. This suffering, however, wasn't up to chance in the Berserk universe, but rather instigated by the godly beings known as the Godhand. They controlled and manipulated the life of Griffith only to bring him before them so that Griffith would accept his so-called fate of joining their ranks. He accepted the offer and was reborn as Femto after the events of the eclipse. While we do not learn in detail how Morg abducted Miquella and what he, or potentially the Formless Mother, did to the Empyrean, both stories have a good deal of similar events and visual cues to the point of being very similar. As we learn, Miquella is as of now in a lifeless state with a debilitated body. A body that is lying dormant within a cocon in the literal midst of hell. And while we're on the topic, let's go over this other identical story beat. Both Griffith and Miquella undergo a metamorphosis in order to evolve into a new, reborn being, with Griffith actually having a total of 2 instances instead of just one like Miquella. While the reasons for Miquella's transformation remain unconfirmed for the time being, those for Griffith are known to us. The reasons for Griffith's first metamorphosis were his wishes to regain a functional and improved new body to once again chase his dream of obtaining a kingdom, which is why he sacrificed his soldiers and damned them to a fate of suffering and despair. As for his second transformation, this took place during the Conviction arc. Although this event should be considered more of a reincarnation than an evolution. By using the body of the demon baby of Guts and Casca in combination with an egg, Griffith regained his body in the physical realm and wasn't bound to the astral plane of existence, while also being capable of switching to his femto body and using its abilities in the physical realm as well. As such, he regained a copy of his former body, becoming Griffith once again in the world of man, and still being recognized as femto in the magical world. While Griffith's reasons are comprehensible, Miquella's motives can only be speculated upon. What exactly Miquella tries to accomplish with his metamorphosis isn't currently stated in any lore, and different speculations are all that we have right now. The most prominent speculations are that he tried to heal his affliction of eternal childhood, or that he attempted to see the Halic tree grow to its full height to finally be able to replace the Earth tree. To that end, he placed his body into the Halic tree to provide it with the nutrients to grow. Additionally, I want to point out a few lines of dialogue from Gideon Ofnir when informing him of Miquella's cocon. He mentions him slumbering in there, but contemplates destroying his cocon just to be safe since Miquella still remains a mystery to the all-knowing, which could infer that Miquella undergoes a transformation that poses either a threat to Gideon Ofnir or even the entire lands between. Whether this threat is a new body or his new persona as Saint Trina, it's just as debatable as Miquella being a menace to the lands between. However, I believe that he is currently somehow engaged with his new persona of Saint Trina, bringing us to the other similarity between Miquella and Griffith, the multiple personas both of them have. Throughout Berserk, we learn that Griffith has/obtains 3 personas throughout different stages in the story. His first and most familiar to us is his human form as Griffith. Later on, he obtains his godhand persona of Femto and transforms into a being of the astral world. A persona representing all of the evil characteristics he was already capable of when he was still just a human. While his now Griffith persona encompasses his good traits, like being seen as a charismatic wise man and divine ideal king, showing the duality of his character in the form of good and evil by giving it 2 distinct physical representations. A representation similar to the yin and yang philosophy describing opposite forces being interconnected, i.e. being a just leader and hero who wishes only for the best of his subjects, while also being the ruler of demons, manipulating others to fulfill selfish desires and dooming anyone or anything to achieve one's own goals. With these 2 personas, Griffith already achieves a perfect yin and yang balance between both of these. As such, the third transformation Griffith undergoes almost unwillingly several times disturbs this balance. A disturbance that is depicted through his third identity as the Moonlight Boy, appearing during a moonlit night before Guts and Casca. This boy is the result of using the body of the demon baby of Casca and Guts to obtain Griffith's physical body. An unforeseen side effect is that the body yearns to be close to his parents, resulting in Griffith to transform into a young boy. The purpose of this persona isn't completely understood by Griffith, and while being well argued as well as covered by the Berserk community, it still isn't too clear why this element was incorporated into the story. In my personal opinion, I believe it to be symbolic of a state outside of the concept of good and evil. As the case is with children, they don't have a grasp on the human construct of good and evil. They simply exist in the world and do whatever they want. Only through their parents instilling and admonishing certain behaviors do children learn what is proper good or bad behavior until they become adults. As a result, the persona of the Moonlight Boy may allow Griffith to forget his other 2 personas for a limited time and to exist without complicated feelings next to the 2 characters he loves the most, giving him the chance to decide for himself towards which path he should strive more when turning back into an adult. His Griffith persona, embodying now all of his good characteristics, or instead lean more towards his Femto persona, representing all of the evil he is capable of. I'm covering Griffith at this point probably the most extensive, due to the identical parallels towards Miquella's state, since Miquella also has one other persona, that of Saint Trina. A discovery made through item descriptions about Saint Trina, like for example Saint Trina's torch, Saint Trina's lily, and the sword of Saint Trina. Yet it is still very difficult to grasp anything about either of his personas. For example, we learn about Miquella's many good deeds, like seeking a cure for Melania's scarlet rot, granting shelter to shunned species, and attempting to revive Godwyn. Yet other than with Griffith, we don't know to what lengths nor the actions Miquella is willing to commit for fulfilling these goals. Giving him on the surface all of the positive character traits of Griffith, yet we don't see whether Miquella masks his quote-unquote femto side with an act, just like Griffith does during the Golden Age arc. In addition, his other Saint Trina persona is probably the most enigmatic thing in all of Elden Ring as of now, making speculations about the purpose for this persona near impossible, with the only certain aspect about Saint Trina being that she appears only in dreams and exists as such only in an astral realm. And as I have already covered in the previous point, Miquella is currently in the midst of his metamorphosis involving Saint Trina. That means he is giving up his child body and presumably evolves into the adult form of Saint Trina. The transition from a boy into an adult, specifically a man, is the image we see with Griffith in the last chapter before the passing of the author of Berserk. If we draw the parallel between this scene, Miquella growing into Saint Trina, and apply my theory about the symbolic meaning of the Moonlight Boy, we can come to the conclusion that Miquella is at a crossroad with a decision to make about his morality. Just like it was the case with Griffith and the God Hand, Miquella was abducted and influenced by Moog and his outer god, the Formless Mother. Miquella slumbers in the cocon where he evolves into Saint Trina, the pure astral being he wishes to become. I will presume that Miquella's transformation goal is to become a pure astral being, so that he is in a similar state like Rani. Rani's soul is inhabiting the astral realm, a result of the Night of the Black Knives, and she uses her doll body only to interact with the physical world. Contrary to Rani's ritual, Miquella's transformation is interrupted by the interference of Moog. As a consequence, Miquella is possibly in a struggle to decide whether he still wishes to become Saint Trina or turn into an astral monster, as was the case with Griffith's transformation into Femto at the behest of the God Hand. As such, Miquella has to make the decision of becoming his new good persona of Saint Trina, or evolve into an evil persona similar to Femto. I know that this point is very wild, and I'm building my own speculations on speculations while interpreting some events of Berserk in my own way. However, I'm sure that you've noticed by now how complex the topic of personas is, and that this topic is an entire video of its own. As such, please don't take everything I said as solid proof and just take away from this point the following details. Both Miquella and Griffith possess multiple personas representing different aspects of their character, and the similarities of how both have obtained their personas, as well as the narrative parallels between both series in this matter. Maybe share your own thoughts about the personas of Griffith and Miquella with me in the comments and point out things that I haven't addressed. And since we've touched the topic of dreams briefly, let's take a look at the last similarity between Griffith and Miquella. Both Miquella and Griffith share the unique similarity that they appear to others in dreams. Miquella is known to have appeared in the dreams of others as Saint Trina, while Griffith, before obtaining his physical body during the Conviction arc, also appeared in the dreams of others. Griffith's goal was to gain support from the masses by presenting himself as their coming savior, the White Hawk. Also, he could further his goal of obtaining his kingdom. While Griffith's intentions are clear, the purpose of Saint Trina's appearances in dreams has yet to be revealed to us. What we learn from cut content though, is that Saint Trina sang specifically to those who were afflicted with the flame of frenzy, like the merchants for example, in order to quell their suffering. So, instead of gunning for her own goal, it seems that Saint Trina only wished to aid those who were suffering and essentially do good by others. But as this is cut content, it isn't necessarily how things are right now or will be in future Elden Ring lore. As such, we will definitely learn more about the purpose of Saint Trina and dreams in general in the upcoming Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. And yet, despite the differences in motives, the likeness in the way these two characters appear to others in dreams adds another unique layer to their similarities, making them almost identical characters which, after all of these points, I honestly believe they are in terms of inspiration. But before ending this video, there are two major points about Miquella that I haven't touched on yet explicitly. Those being his goals and moral alignment, which, next to being intertwined via causality, they are also the key to fully understand Miquella. Let's take a moment to explore them and see if we can answer them under the pretext that Griffith and Miquella are essentially one and the same character. First, let's consider the plenty goals, ambitions and dreams of Miquella. His most self-centered goal is to heal himself from his eternal childhood affliction. To that end, and to simultaneously grow the Halig tree to its full height, Miquella in all likelihood embedded himself at the base of the tree within the core we encounter in Moog's palace. In order to cure his affliction, he is undergoing a metamorphosis to become the astral being known as Saint Trina, which is something we can base on the similarities between Miquella and Griffith, specifically in context with Griffith's transformations that we have covered already. Another of his goals was to establish the Halig tree as his own kingdom/faction, operating out of reach from the Golden Order. This is being indicated by a location of the Halig tree and the means by which it is reached. One of his possible reasons must have been to create a safe haven where discrimination against misbegotten, albinoics, and any other outcasts from the Golden Order wouldn't exist and also couldn't reach them, as well as having a place to research unalloyed gold for arguably his most important wish, that being to cure Malenia from her scarlet rot, the disease that plagued her for her entire life and steadily tries to take control over her. Miquella's determination to find a way to heal her is a very prominent aspiration of his, since he abandoned the fundamentalism teachings of the Golden Order due to it being incapable of curing Malenia, showcasing his empathy and compassion towards those Miquella cares for, which might have also been another reason for why he granted those outside of grace refugee at the Halig Tree. Lastly, we learn of his desire to revive Godwyn, as Vati perfectly summarized in his video. The loss of a loved one is always a difficult experience, and it is no different for Miquella. However, his determination to bring Godwyn back shows his resilience and refusal to just accept his death in soul alone. Which for me raises the question as to how far Miquella is willing to go to revive Godwyn and what kind of consequences it might have for others. We learn that Miquella wishes for an eclipse, since it is somehow a key component to grant Godwyn his soul back. How exactly this could work remains a mystery, but I'm very inclined to believe that Miquella can make it happen due to him being arguably the most intelligent character in all of Elden Ring. Which one way we can learn of is through the polybow stating the following: the complex mechanism which required advanced mathematical and mechanical understanding to craft was likely made by a certain genius who learned Golden Order fundamentalism. While this doesn't explicitly references Miquella, it is still a fair assumption to assume him being referred to here, due to his extraordinary feats such as creating a needle to ward off the influence of outer gods and, the most obvious hint, all of the prostheses Malenia uses, marking Miquella as an extremely intelligent person, which coincides with Griffith as well, since he is also extremely intelligent. But let's not digress too far now. As a result, his goals and achievements are very similar to those of Griffith, excluding, however, the research for a cure for Malenia and to revive Godwyn from the dead. Plus, contrasting Griffith again, Miquella's main goal is presumably also not to have a kingdom to rule over, but instead, as mentioned numerous times, to cure Malenia. Considering all of these aspects, let's now assess Miquella's moral alignment, which proves to be the most difficult topic to discuss in this entire video. In Berserk, Griffith's character is ambiguous in terms of morality. There are plenty good points to mark him as an evil villain, but at the same time also a fair amount of reasons to recognize him as a tragic figure. Before and even now while writing these last pages, I got more and more uncertain about Miquella's moral standing. After all, with the sheer number of similarities between both characters, I'm very willing to consider both Griffith and Miquella to be eerily identical, enticing me to the point where I could come to the conclusion that in terms of morality, Miquella is just as ambiguous as Griffith. However, this is where the goals of both characters are important to consider, and why I mentioned the existence of a causality between goals and moral alignment. Because at the core of the actions both characters commit, the desire to strive closer to the fulfillment of their dreams is the core motivating force moving them towards taking these actions. As such, when considering Miquella's actions and goals, we can begin to assess his morality. But as I have alluded to in Griffith's case, this still isn't easy to answer, while points like seeking a cure for his sister Malenia, granting refugee at the Halig Tree without creating a refugee problem in the first place, yearning to see his half-brother Godwyn again, and cradling people into sleep, especially those afflicted with the Flame of Frenzy, are all actions which would give Miquella a good alignment score. There's one major data source lacking that prevents me from giving him this result. The thing bothering me the most is not having had an in-game interaction with his character where I could observe some of his actions. While being universally considered a kind person, it is yet another parallel to Griffith, who was liked by everyone, or rather most people. After all, on a surface level, Griffith emitted the most suitable behavior which would get him closer to his goals without creating additional obstacles. While in the shadows, unbeknown to most, he deployed any possible scheme to manipulate or eliminate all the enemies in his way. Character traits that were later embodied through his femto persona, as we have already covered. An indicator for a similar behavior is also present for Miquella within Elden Ring's lore. The item description of the Bewitching Branch states the following about Miquella. The Empyrean Miquella is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affections. As such, the odds are in favor of Miquella also possessing character traits similar to those of Femto, without any more lore or indicators to affirm or debunk this point. As a result, much like not being able to unanimously define the moral alignment of Griffith, so too seems to be the case for Miquella due to a lack of information. I'm convinced that with Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, we will finally get more information about Miquella, through which we can then ascertain whether he is an identical character copy of Griffith or not. But for now, I personally prefer to consider Miquella as a good person based on his selfless goals in which he differs from Griffith. These being a cure from the Scarlet Rot for Malenia and to bring the soul of Godwyn back. Especially curing Malenia is his biggest driving force for Miquella, which I want to stress again since it is his most contrasting point in regards to Griffith. After all, Miquella spent his time to no avail studying Golden Order fundamentalism, and then invested even more time into unalloyed gold just to find a possible cure. These two goals of his are very selfless acts and a far cry from Griffith's ultimately selfish ambition to have his own kingdom no matter what, which in my eyes marks Miquella as an antithesis to Griffith in terms of moral alignment. But only as long as he never considers or does sacrifice anyone and or anything to achieve these two goals. And with these closing thoughts, I'm ending this long and complex video and wish you a good day. Go ahead and share your opinion with me about how you view Miquella now that you have listened to my thoughts. Until next time, ciao!